Chapter 7, Aeolus. How you all doing? Now this one's an interesting chapter, this, because it's the first time that Joyce comes into his own style-wise, really. I get the impression with this chapter, well, with the whole book, to be honest, Joyce is really pushing the boundaries of what a book and what a novel can be. He's almost saying to people, you think you know what a fucking book is? I will show you what a book is, you know. I'll show you what you can do with words and language, you know. You think that it's almost like Joyce is freeing words and sentences in Ulysses, because thus far they've just been trapped in books and passages and paragraphs, and he's almost just breaking all the rules and saying, like, look, you can do anything with words and sentences and chapters, and I'm going to show you how. And this, the style of this chapter has kind of been put into news headlines. So you'll get the headlines, the first one, in the heart of the Hibernian metropolis, the wearer of the crown, gentleman of the press, for example. Really short paragraphs with headlines on them and that describe the action that's going on within the chapter. And of course, Joyce does this because he's setting the chapter in the newspaper offices. So it's fitting to kind of use a style that matches the place that he's setting the narrative. So in a way, it's really, really refreshing, really interesting, and I'm like buzzed off the fact that Joyce is doing this. But I really struggled with it. I don't know whether any of you did, but there's so much going on because it's split up into like different sections and different bits and different headlines. It's so disjointed, you can't really get a grip on the following one person. It's a busy office, as you can imagine, and there's lots of characters, there's lots of people milling about. The action changes, like 1 minute we're with Bloom, the next minute we're with the editor, I forget his name now. The next minute we're with Stephen Dedalus, Crawford, the editor, and it's just quite hard. You know, there's a lot of men in this chapter. There's a lot of men discussing, having a laugh between themselves, discussing, you know, well, for example, the riddle, the Rose of Castile. That is it Crawford? Does Crawford tell that riddle? I can't remember. You know what? There's so many characters, new characters in this, that I feel slightly confused by it. I don't know whether any of the rest of you also felt that sort of confusion. Maybe it's because I'm reading at night and I need to like get a good grasp of the characters and I need to be less tired and kind of write a list down of who everyone is. But it's sometimes the way they are, you know, introduced. For example, William Braden, Esquire of Oakland, Sandymount, one of the headlines, you know, it'll say, Red Murray touched Mr. Bloom's arm with the shears and whispered Braden. Like, well, who's Red Murray? You know, all these characters just like that we've not met before just come in and we're just expected to, Joyce just expects us to know who they are. Saying that, interesting chapter. I think we learned a little bit more about Bloom, really, and his increased, we've learned about his increasing social isolation, I think, carrying on from the last chapter when he was in the funeral carriage and he kind of just kind of got ignored by the rest of his peers. I feel like that's the exact same thing happens in these newspaper offices. And you can see the way, you know, that one of the big ways through Crawford, the editor, who kind of, his relationship with Bloom, when Bloom says, oh, I've got this advert done for Mr. Keys, for the House of Keys, you know, he says that he'll have, he'll do it for not 3 months, but for 2 months. Can we go with it? And like, he's just saying like, kiss my arse, basically. He says, just, you know, I'm not interested, Bloom. And in fact, they have a whole little headline called KMA. Well, you can tell him he can kiss my arse, Miles Crawford said, throwing out his arms for emphasis. Tell him that straight from the stable. You know, and it's just the way he answers Bloom in this sort of authoritative, I'm better than you way, makes you feel that Bloom is not their equal. And then that brings me to the next newspaper heading, KMRIA, which of course you know the meaning of in the following text, which says, "He can kiss my royal Irish arse," Miles Crawford cried loudly over his shoulder. "Anytime he likes, tell him." And I thought it was really funny, these headlines that Joyce had chosen to make for those particular chapters. So yeah, that differs a lot from the way that Crawford deals with Stephen Dedalus. Because of course Stephen Dedalus comes to him with the article on foot and mouth from Deasy and said, "Oh, any chance you can get that in?" And of course Crawford's like, "Yeah, sure, of course we can get that in, that's no problem." And it kind of feels like a members club, Stephen doesn't even work for the paper, but Crawford wants him to write for it and will do him a favour and put in Deasy's article, whereas Bloom is actually working there as an advertising representative, trying to do his job, and Crawford doesn't listen to him, and he's just like, "Oh, later, I can't be arsed with you, tell him to kiss my arse," that sort of thing. And yeah, we see Bloom as an outcast, and I think after all the letchiness that I saw in previous chapters, I now do start to feel quite sorry for him. And of course in this chapter as well, it's the first time I think that I'm aware that we know about Bloom's Jewish background, because in one of the, I don't know what to call them, sections, articles, headlines, Bloom, is there and he's watching the printers print the paper, and he's saying that he's looking at how they have to put everything backwards, to print. And he's saying, "Read it backwards first, quickly he does it. Must require some practice, that Mangy D," I can't even pronounce this, "Character P, poor Papa with his Haggadah book, reading backwards with his finger to me. Pesach, next year in Jerusalem, oh dear, oh dear." So basically you realise that obviously Bloom has been read to in Hebrew by his dad, and that he has got a Jewish background. And then to me it all clicked. That's to do with the isolation, the Jewishness of Bloom, and I thought that was sad and made me feel sort of really sorry for him. And of course there's loads of stuff that go on in this chapter. It was too complicated for me to even go through it line by line. But we have little tiny scenes that happen in the offices of the newspapers between Bloom, between Stephen Dedalus and the editor, between a lawyer and the editor and other people who work at the newspaper, comings and goings. And it just gives you that general feel of a busy newspaper office. And I think that you don't have to understand every line, every sentence, every paragraph. I certainly didn't. But you are left at the end of the chapter feeling like you've got a sense of that environment, and I think that's kind of important, just to let go sometimes and just think that you've got a sense of that environment. And at the end of the chapter, obviously some of the main things that happen is Bloom's trying to get this advert into print and trying to get the approval from his editor, and his editor is having none of it and not really bothered. You've got some Stephen Dedalus stuff where he's trying to get Deasy's article in, and just some general chit chat which we're kind of used to. I guess one of the interesting things is that Stephen and Bloom's paths cross, and of course Bloom notices Stephen's shoes and says, "Oh, they're new. He didn't have new shoes before," and he wonders where he got them from. And then he looks and he notices that they're all muddy, and of course that mud will have come from the beach when we saw Stephen on the beach, a few chapters before. So they actually meet in person for the first time in this chapter. And then of course they go to the pub, but as we all know, Stephen was meant to meet Mulligan in the pub at 12:30. But whether they're not going to meet, whether they're going to meet in that pub, whether Stephen's snubbed him and gone to have a drink with these people, we don't know. So yeah, I think it was an interesting chapter for sure. I found it hard, maybe one of the hardest chapters for me so far, but I cannot work out whether it's because I'm reading when I'm tired or whether it actually was pretty hard to cling on to because of the different characters and the choppy style. So tell me what you think. Let's see also what Chris Rich thinks. You know, I've not been watching Chris's videos when I've been doing this, because I don't want to watch his and then just repeat what he said, you know. So yeah, let's see what he says. Maybe he can, or you all, or us together, can shed some light in the tangled mire of Ulysses. But let's stick with it. Whatever we do, we've got to stick with it. See ya for the next chapter.